Seems fair to me. Well, if you don't know what fair is, you can't make it unacceptable by any reason.
Donnybrook is made possible by the members of the 9 Network.
Lou Fest is canceled. Among the topics we're going to talk about on this edition of Donnybrook. Thanks to our friends at the Gatesworth, and thanks to you for joining us week in and week out. Let's meet the panelists who are assembled around the big, somewhat green table for this edition. She's Brenda Talent, the CEO of the Show Me Institute, sitting in for the vacationing Wendy Weiss. Bill McClellan, one of our founders from the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. Another founder from St. Louis Magazine, he's Ray Hartmann. And from STLmag.com and the St. Louis American, the one and only Alvin Reid, with whom we're going to kick off this discussion. Lou Fest, lots of acts, not going to be here. Is it Modest Mouse, and Modest Mouse, and T-Pain, Michael McDonald of Ferguson, Robert Plant, and many others. We're supposed to be here on the 8th and the 9th, Alvin, as you know. And then at about 2 o'clock in the morning, on the 5th, the organizers said, hey, we're canceling it because we have some debt problems and there might be rain, and there were some ill-timed media reports that didn't help us. But, you know, I really feel bad for those who made plane reservations, had bought food to serve, those who had, in some cases, non-refundable hotel reservations. And there's a lot of people who are losing money as a result of this. Overall, what are your thoughts about Lou Fest's demise?
Well, once again, another disgraceful episode in the history of St. Louis. The short, now I mean not over time, we've had a lot, but just here recently, it just seems like it never stops. And folks, this is sad, and this is embarrassing. And look, I don't have a lot of friends who are across the country who are big like music festival people and all that. My phone blew up, and half are laughing and half are like ill-timed media reports. The rain. Said like I would have liked to have been a fly on the wall when Robert Plant's people got, you know, wind of all this and see what his reaction is. International rock stars, you know, like, and it's just sad. And like Kranzberg Foundation, they were using it to, you know, display some of their young jazz artists, get them on like what was, you know, like a national stage. That all goes away. The people that paid to be sponsors who are never going to see their money again, you know, those restaurants who had bought the food, hopefully they could sell it. I guess Robert Plant is going to be here Sunday, but I just feel like, man, it's almost like Robert Plant is throwing, you know, coins in our Hardee's cup on the corner. We're like the homeless of tourism suddenly. It's just sad. And look, other cities, I think, face crises with festivals or things like that, and those involved are smart enough to say, hey, we need help. And I guess this crew waited too long. But at the same time, nobody to step up, nobody to do anything, just another black eye for St. Louis. And it's sad. It's just sad.
Well, some are stepping up.
Yeah, well, I think there's a feel-good story. For example, Kranzberg, they have a whole, they're doing this series at the Grand L. And we, at our website and the RFT and others, there is an element that I think people ought to be proud of, how many people are stepping up, large and small. Plant's going to be at the pageant. And so there's a lot of folks. There's some elements going forward. I don't disagree. It's a bad thing. I don't know that I would generalize it as some terrible thing for St. Louis. This is a business venture that definitely got in over its head. And I'm certainly not going to criticize somebody for failed business ventures, having my own share of them. But the way they handled it was horrible. I mean,
well,
and
don't you think
to blame
though,
the media and stuff? Was
yeah,
terrible.
I wouldn't blame the media, but don't you think that it's just one more story? I mean, we had Ferguson, we had the Rams left town, we got the report 2 weeks ago that tourism and convention business is down. We have the NAACP with a boycott of the state of Missouri. It's like we're in a rut.
Well, but we have.
But this is a private entity. Right. I mean, they mismanage.
Yeah.
And what's really
but it reflects on everybody.
What's interesting to me is when you read the story and you find about when people were getting paid a full year after the last event. You're like, come on, guys. Some of you should have had notice that there were real problems with who was running Lou Fest if you're not getting paid until a year after and then being asked to pony up for now.
Well, remember, it was just a couple years ago that St. Louis gave an exclusive contract to
It was
some
Fortnite,
big company out of
2014.
L.A. and we
Right.
kicked some smaller
That's-
festivals out of downtown area because we're gonna get top stars, and then nothing ever happened.
Well, Bill's so right. That was more embarrassing as a community
Yes.
when our city government basically, it was like, I forget, Jeff Rainford said it was going to be like $80 million each time.
It was a big deal for the Slay administration.
And we were kicking out practically everybody. That to me was more embarrassing as a community. This was clearly some guys that this thing started out successfully, but these guys just got in over the head.
But wait a minute.
And I'm not defending them,
the
but I'm saying
country doesn't know that we entered this ridiculous deal with this entity out here in Los Angeles, and we kicked some stuff out on Memorial Day and Labor Day. Okay, the country doesn't know that. The country knows we just blew Lou Fest. Okay, for people from all over the country who are coming here, the artists know, and like
that's
I said,
it. The artists know,
yeah.
and the artists who would have been playing, like Michael McDonald, he could have had an evening in Bridgeport, Connecticut, or something. He's gonna have an empty Saturday night, and the artists, musicians, already are talking among themselves that their vans get broken into when they perform in St. Louis. So this doesn't help our reputation.
No, there's no question about that.
it's just
Well, it ain't good news.
right. And then,
Well, let me ask you this. Someone suggested to me today that the moneyed class in St. Louis, and I'm looking at you, Brenda.
Not me.
Okay. We're supporting the Art Museum, Opera Theater, St. Louis, the Symphony, but that's all for the older folks, largely. How about the moneyed types supporting music for the millennials and kind of supporting concerts like this, which heretofore have not been supported by the deep-pocketed
all right, but now,
individuals?
Enterprise was a sponsor. And regional, I guess, chamber was a sponsor.
I thought Centene, there were some major sponsors.
And they can write it off. They can whatever that $5,000 to Enterprise is a nickel to me, and I'm not making light of that because I'm sure they made some calls and said like, hey, we can't have this, all right. But I just think that if someone had reached out and said, all right, this is where we're at, and there's not going to be a Lou Fest unless somebody steps up with a pretty big check pretty quickly. We don't know how you pay you back or whatever. But you got to ask, and if you don't want to be embarrassed, St. Louis, figure out a way. They knew not to go to City Hall. They knew not to ask Lyda Cruz in.
Alvin, I'm sorry. It's Woodstock didn't get corporate money. I mean, they just said we're going to have a big party out on the farm, and you get some musicians. The idea of Lou Fest, which was run so poorly, like Brenda said, they didn't pay for a year, to all of a sudden say, hey, we need some help.
No,
Who wants
emergency.
to help?
I'm just saying, one time where maybe you could have said, like, help. It's an emergency. There may not be, Lou Fest might be dead forever after this year, but at least they should have tried to
that's
rescue
a fact.
it.
What's so strange about Lou Fest is it was such a brief thing. It was started about, I want to say 8 years ago by this guy Steve Cohn, who no longer lives here, and apparently did a fine job getting it off the ground, and it eventually got sold to like the biggest concert company in the world, Live Nation, and then for whatever reason, they looked at it and said, they're out of here, and now it clearly ended up with people that got in way over their head, and they didn't look good at the end, that's for sure.
Okay, let's move on to another topic with you, Brenda. Today, Senator Claire McCaskill said she had misgivings about the New York Times running an anonymous op-ed by a senior Trump administration official, essentially saying that there are many in the White House, including this anonymous writer, who have real misgivings about this president. They might agree with some of his policy, like deregulation and tax cuts, but they're very concerned that his behavior will have a deleterious effect on the nation. So there's this kind of group, a sleeper cell within the White House, which is working against the administration. Senator Claire McCaskill was not comfortable with this op-ed being anonymous. How'd you feel about that?
Well, I agree with the senator. I think she's right on this. To me, I question the journalistic ethics of publishing something like this on an anonymous basis. The accusations are such that if this person is truly serving in the administration, they should resign and then come public with their accusations. I mean, the notion that people are basically conspiring behind the scenes in order to undermine the presidency, I mean, that's very troublesome. If this individual, if the President Trump isn't qualified to serve, These people owe a responsibility to the nation to come forward and put that on the table rather than saying, hey, we're taking care of things behind the scene. I mean, it really feeds into that whole deep state narrative that's going on right now.
I think we're making news. I mean, Talon endorses McCaskill as
No,
news.
no.
That's
Even a clock is a broken clock is right twice a day, right?
Just messing with you. No, but I agree with you. I know that's no great comfort to you either. But I as from a publishing standpoint, you know, it's a one-source story. First of all, I think it was beautifully written, and I think it's accurate. I mean, from everything we've seen, I think the most damning aspect of this whole story is Bob Woodward's book that Donald Trump has taken to the top of the bestseller list before it comes out, which really, because now we're talking about one of the really great journalists of all time, and I do think the fitness of the President of the United States is in question. I don't think it helps to have an anonymous story done this way, as well written and as creditable as it might be, because now we're all arguing about who did it and the anonymous.
I thought it was something that a high school paper would do. You know, an anonymous source editorial. And especially, it didn't really break any new ground. It wasn't like everybody thinks that President Trump is a stable genius. Right. And I thought, how can you do an anonymous editorial or commentary on Trump, and you just feed into the whole media hates Trump kind of fake news thing?
Well,
I was
might be
surprised
true.
the New York Times
But
would
all right,
do it.
I'll defend it in this way. One, it came from somebody on the inside of the administration. I do believe that actually happened. Okay, so that's one reason why I don't think it's like the deep state and whatnot, and they were trying to get rid of the president. I mean, these are his own people he hired. And then two, I'm not a big fan of any like anonymous source, but everybody's comfortable if it's just a quote or one person. So if you're going to run any anonymous quote or any sources close to the Rams, the president, whatever, if you're going to run one quote like that, then you have to accept an entire
I don't think so,
commentary.
Alvin. People don't like the boss. I mean, there's a lot of people who don't like their boss, and you know, we're going to run op-ed pieces on, you know, a high-up official in Monsanto who talks about the Monsanto CEO.
But this is so historic, Bill and Ray and Brenda. Alvin is absolutely
but just
right.
one quote.
If you can go along with in the body of the article, senior administration official says, and you do that a lot. And in fact, all of Woodward's book is based on people speaking on background, and so it's really no different.
And if somebody said, wait, if somebody had someone in Kim Gardner's office said the place is just, not picking on you, Kim, but the place is just crazy down here, okay? Nobody seems to be that offended by it, and you don't know if they're mad at the ball. You don't know anything, because basically, to have an anonymous source in a story, a quote, one or whatever, that passes muster, but this doesn't.
Yeah, because that's in the body of a story, Alvin. This is the entire story.
Right.
Is by somebody.
So a little bit of water is fine, but you don't want to flood.
Well, saying that it's a senior
right.
official in the administration can mean a lot of things. It doesn't mean
Could be an intern.
No, it could be a holdover from a prior administration. Where are they?
One time, the New York Times a couple of years ago did run a story on someone from a government energy agency, quoted as a senior administration official, and then they were outed when they found out it was an intern.
And look, the use of anonymous sources is part of our journalism. It's accepted and done properly. Like Woodward's a good example. His story, he's got like thousands of hours of tapes. When he talked about a document that was taken off the president's desk, in his book, I understand, has a PDF of the document. I mean, so we're talking about
anonymous
well-sourced
sources.
When I agree with Bill on the point that it feeds the narrative to do this as a one-source anonymous story. And what's bad about it, feeding that narrative, is I'm pretty sure, based on everything we're hearing and seeing, mostly from Republicans, by the way, that there's validity to what's in this piece.
So, all right, there you have it. Let me ask you, Ray, about another story, but this time closer to home. The Post-Dispatch, our major daily, is seeking the names of the 28 police officers who are on an exclusion list by the Circuit Attorney Kim Gardner, which we talked about last week, that she has this list. She will not prosecute cases that are filed by these officers. All right. So now the Post-Dispatch would like the names of these officers, even though the officers in their union say, hey, we don't know how we got on the list. We don't know how to get off the list. This is not fair to us because it's going to tar our reputations. What's your thought?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, certainly asking for the list, you can't blame the paper for seeking it. There's a question about what you do with it when you have it, because if you do just publish the names, you know, there's a real question about what you're doing to the reputation of people. Because I think most of us agreed that this was a bizarre thing to do. And since our last show, by the way, it got more interesting because she said that the police said it was okay, and the police said no, we didn't. And as I say, I've always been a fan of there being a fair amount of tension between the prosecutor and the police. This may be getting to a crazy degree. I don't know. Like I said, I'm not going to criticize the newspaper for looking for information. I'm just not. I'm not sure if I was the Post, I would be publishing it, though.
Well, that's a pretty thoughtful take on it, Ray. Because I think the paper's the paper. It has to try to get this information. Right. If the lead criminal justice official in the city says there's 28 officers who she thinks are so unreliable you can't even do cases, you say, well, people need to know this. I mean, I don't have any faith in Kim Gardner, though. I have much more faith in the police department than I do in Kim Gardner. But, I mean, this has to be resolved. We cannot go on with 28 anonymous people out there. I mean, if you get arrested and you later find out that, well, the arresting officer was one of Kim Gardner's 28, this isn't fair to anybody.
Well, this is incredibly irresponsible on her part in creating the list. The judge today granted the restraining order so that he's going to consider more of the facts about whether it can be disclosed or not. But when you talk about creating such a list, I mean, obviously, if you're a defense lawyer, you need to know, was the conviction of your client tainted because of one of these officers? But let's all go back to the rule of law. If she really believes these officers are not trustworthy, that they're swearing out false warrants, are signing the facts, she ought to be considering, is she going to prosecute them?
I said that last week. Yeah,
and also
I said the same thing. Like, wait a minute, you should just bring the 28 in and say, like, look, I'm watching like a hawk, and if there's anything, I'll have your badge, and you'll be facing, a charge too. What Kim Gardner needs to do is let's get up off the anonymous source here, and maybe if this, the judge is going to hear this case. All right, you said the police kind of requested this list, and you talked to some high official or whatever. Who is it? What did they say? Where did the meeting take place? I'd be more than happy to disclose that. And then what happened with the 28 names, the police can decide, we can decide. But I would say, like, this is the crux of this matter. This is where this started. Right. I didn't sit down in my office and draw up this list of 28 names based on reviewing cases.
Let me ask you this. If the names were on, let's say those 28 were in front of the Internal Affairs Department, their names wouldn't be public, would they?
No.
So this to me is very similar.
Right.
No,
this
it's
is
not.
the woman who brought William Tisby in as the lead investigator.
But wait a minute.
Well,
it is different
crazy.
because if, like Brenda said, if there are 28 police officers, and let's say 14 of them, let's say 14 dubious, whatever, 7 really shouldn't be on the list, but there are 7 that are just straight, like she feels like, no, you make up evidence, we've got proof of it, you've been doing it for years, whatever. The public needs to know.
Well, no, then you adjudicate it, or you go to the Post Commission, or you go to Internal Affairs, or you go to the Civilian Review Board, which you've been asking for.
No,
you just don't draw up a list where the guys don't know how they get on
I
it
agree.
or off it.
And there's an interesting couple points. One, there is such a thing as this Brady process, whatever, in which if somebody has,
they didn't do that either.
No, but if somebody has a pattern of being
untruthful,
they can be excluded. But even then, there's due process involved for that person, which doesn't seem to be happening here. But also, the interesting link between these two stories that have nothing to do with each other is the commonality of when you have anonymity, the fallout in the Trump administration right now, there's all these people rushing forward to say, wasn't me, because and the police are in the same situation. It's like when you just say, well, 28 of them are bad apples, now everybody's tainted, and it's very unfair to everybody.
All right, let's move on.
Force.
All right.
It really does.
Hey, Brenda, I want to ask you about Jack Dorsey, the CEO of Twitter and Square, quite a successful grad of Bishop DuBourg. And Twitter has 336 million monthly or yearly users, just an amazing tech platform. Well, he was hauled in front of Congress this week. He had 2 hearings, one in the Senate, one in the House. And he's accused by the Democrats of allowing the Russians to infiltrate Twitter with bots. He's accused of the Republicans of not allowing conservative voices on Twitter. Do you think that Twitter should be regulated by Uncle Sam?
No, I don't. I think it's a private company. Competitors should enter the field. I know that they've talked about whether it's something like a utility, but no, I mean, competitors can come into this field and compete, and if they have a better platform, then people are going to use it. And if people are troubled by how Twitter operates, they'll move to the other platform. We, at the Show Me Institute, we actually had an experience where we were shadow banned. We often talk about policies, and we would use a hashtag it would be MOLEG, standing for Missouri Legislature, right? So you can go to this hashtag and you'd see the stream where different people are talking about policy and having a conversation. Well, we were shadow banned, and what that means is while you could see what we posted on our Twitter account, you wouldn't see it at the hashtag. For 2 weeks, we went back and forth with Twitter to like, why are we banned? Why aren't we showing up on the stream for the hashtag? We never got an answer. We were restored. We don't know whether it was an algorithm of theirs or whether someone complained, but there never came back a response like, we found out this is why. No explanation.
To me, the whole thing is creepy because of experiences like that. First, this isn't a national issue. I mean, in case anybody hasn't noticed, the web isn't, an American phenomenon. It's obviously that it is as international as anything or as universal as any problem could be. I am troubled by the fact that so few companies have so incredibly much power over the world, really. But I have no solution. I'm not making a partisan issue. I think it is a problem, but I don't know what the solution is.
This is the biggest waste of time and money. Like the American people say, like, are you kidding me? Trust me. Was it Al Watkins, went down to Jeff City and cussed at the legislature when they was trying to grill him? That's what I would have done at Dorsey. I said, like, now the biggest problem you have is maybe citing me for contempt, because I would have told every one of them, said, like, man, y'all in here wasting
Google
time.
didn't show up.
Yeah, I said, right, exactly. I said, like, are you crazy? I said, y'all wasting my time. I do not have time for you Democrats talking about the Russians. I don't have time for you Republicans saying we're biased. People get on Twitter, they say what they're going to say.
Why? I understand why.
The thing is, if you didn't get your voice on this social media, I mean, I feel bad for you, but you can't get onto the New York Times automatically, and you can't be heard on KMOX just because you want to, or the 9 Network.
That is
correct.
So
I'm not sure why Twitter is held to a different standard.
I don't think it should be, and that's why I say it's a private company. People can decide whether it provides them the means they need in order to communicate, and if not, well, you do have the internet.
I disagree. I disagree with Mr. Reid completely on this in this respect. I don't have a solution, but I do not begrudge the conservatives that are upset about what they see as being, for conservative politicians to speak up and hold hearings, or for liberal.
Does Chuck Schumer get on the Rush Limbaugh show?
No, wait a minute. Let me finish.
When people go off on the Post-Dispatch for being too liberal,
no, I
mean, are they right?
I don't mind the Democrats having hearings to talk about the Russian situation. I don't mind the conservatives having Republicans having hearings.
On Twitter.
I don't think it's
a waste of time.
Very well, Reid.
Powerful man.
Final topic of the
most powerful man in the United States uses Twitter all the time. They shut him down.
Yeah, all right.
I didn't say it should shut him down.
How do you feel about Missouri becoming the first state in the union to regulate food labels so that if it's not livestock or poultry, animal flesh, you won't, in Missouri, be able to label it meat, so that tofu and soy and plant-based meats can no longer be labeled M-E-A-T. How do you feel about that?
I think that's good. It's nice to have the Missouri legislature do something that I approve of for once. And this is a good one. I mean, if it's either meat or it's tofu or soy or whatever, and we should know. I mean, I don't want to order my sausage pizza and find out that, well, that wasn't actually sausage. So I think this is good. I wish we would have been the first to legalize pot, and we weren't. At least we're the first ones to say, hey, it's meat or it's not meat.
Well,
good for us.
Okay, before I want gambling. Can we gamble first and then deal with the meat thing? But no, I'm kind of with Bill. Although, now who's behind this? The Cattlemen Association?
Right.
or
I
whatever?
want to know how many
Good for
people
the
are
farmers.
confused. I mean,
Right. Well,
right now you see labels on things that will tell you it's, tofu-furkey or whatever they call it, where it's tofu. And how many people are actually going, oh, that's turkey? I don't think there have been a lot of people complaining about deceptive practices in this regard.
Well,
and I also think, the other thing, the only thing I would say there's a little bit concern of is if we are manufacturing meat in a petri dish, maybe I would like
That's
to
a little
know
gross.
that.
Well, and
Yeah,
I think,
absolutely.
Well, but now,
let me
the
say,
law
I'm
might-
confused. I'm a little, this one is really interesting because I'm big, when it came to the issues of genetic, food.
GMOs, yeah.
GMOs, I'm all about openness and labeling and stuff, so that's great. But this is so obviously done by the legislators who are all about personal liberty and keeping government out of this, keeping government out of that. The cattlemen show up, and all of a sudden,
Let's regulate.
Well, the
these
cattlemen are
anti-regulators.
Yeah, but this'll be-
we're
this-
first in the nation. We're not first in anything. We were the last people to outlaw bestiality. I mean, we're
Hello.
the idea that
What?
we're
The
also-
cattlemen happen to be right on this
But
issue.
it's going
All
to be
right,
in
and
our
on that
farmers,
note,
too.
let's go to the mailbag and see what people had to say about last week's show. Why not let the handsome, powerful statue of the no doubt flawed but historically crucial Columbus stand, but add a plaque nearby with some additional facts about him that our superior era has discovered? That from Jamie Spencer of De Pere. Thank you, Jamie. We also heard from David Hemingway, who wrote, contrary to Ray's objection, a discussion of Columbus's less-known legacy of genocidal enslavement is part of contemporary efforts to cure our blindness to the structural oppression on which racial privilege continues today. Mr. Hemingway wrote from Soulard. And Lois Smith of Belleville wrote, I think statues should be thought of as works of art and preserved as such. You can write us, care of the 9 Network, 3655 Olive Street, 63108. Don't forget those letters at ketc.org and those tweets. Hashtag DonnybrookSTL, which Alvin and Ray will read in a matter of moments on your turn. Thanks to Brenda for sitting in for Wendy, who will be back next week at this time. Don't go away.
And Brenda asked.
Donnybrook is made possible by the members of the 9 Network.